And McManus, once celebrated as a trusted police officer, became the very monster she was sworn to fight. Michael McManus, her devoted husband, believed in the woman behind the badge, never realizing he was living beside his own executioner. Clara Hayes, the loyal friend, uncovered the chilling truth hidden in plain sight. And David Larkin, the secret lover, lit the match that turned ambition into murder. This is not just a story of betrayal. It is the shocking descent of a protector into a predator, and how the people closest to her were left shattered in the aftermath. And McManus wore her uniform like a second skin. In the small town where she worked, people saw her as the very definition of order and safety. Neighbors waved when she drove by, children looked up to her as a hero, and her colleagues admired her sharp instincts. She had built a reputation as a woman who never cracked under pressure, the kind of officer who could walk into chaos and walk out with calm control. On the surface, she was the image of perfection, dedicated, disciplined, and trustworthy. But beneath the neatly pressed uniform and the practiced smile was a woman carrying shadows that no one else could see. Anne's life had always been about control. She believed in rules, structure, and appearances. To the outside world, she embodied all of these values. Yet inside, frustration simmered. Every compliment about her professionalism felt hollow when she returned home to bills stacked on the kitchen counter and arguments echoing through the house. Every handshake from a grateful citizen reminded her that while she was respected in public, she was restless in private. Still, no one suspected her struggles, and knew how to hide what she didn't want others to see. She carried herself with confidence, masking the dissatisfaction that gnawed at her. For Anne, her badge was not just a symbol of duty. It was armor, a shield that kept others from seeing the cracks forming underneath. The town trusted her completely. She was the officer people called when they needed comfort, the one parents trusted to protect their children, the one neighbors believed would never cross the line. But in Anne's mind, the line between right and wrong was beginning to blur. The woman who had once promised to serve and protect was slowly becoming someone no one could recognize. At home, Anne McManus was a very different person from the one the town admired. The calm, collected officer transformed into a woman weighed down by constant tension. Her marriage to Michael, a quiet mechanic who spent his days fixing cars and saving every dollar he could, was crumbling under the weight of unspoken resentment. Their modest house carried the echoes of their struggles, arguments about money, silences that lasted for days, and a growing sense of distance that neither seemed able to bridge. For Michael, life was about working hard and keeping things simple. For Anne, it was about ambition, status, and control. That clash of values created a divide too wide to ignore. The financial strain only made things worse. Bills stacked up on the counter, late notices arrived in the mail, and Anne began to feel trapped in a life she never wanted. She believed she had sacrificed too much to be living this way. Every time she pulled into their driveway after a long shift, the peeling paint on the porch and the dim light in the living room seemed to mock her. In her mind, Michael had become the symbol of everything holding her back. Anne's frustration grew into something darker. She no longer saw Michael as her partner, but as an obstacle. She wanted more money, more freedom, more respect. Michael's quiet, hard-working nature, which once made her feel safe, now irritated her to the core. His refusal to chase a bigger life only deepened her anger. Behind closed doors, the distance between them became a chasm. To outsiders, they looked like a normal couple facing ordinary struggles. But inside their home, the love that once held them together had rotted into bitterness. Anne's discontent was no longer a passing mood. It was becoming dangerous. Clara Hayes had known Anne McManus for years, long before the uniform and the badge. Their friendship began in high school, forged through late-night study sessions and shared secrets. Clara admired Anne's determination and the way she always seemed in control, but deep down, she often felt like she was living in her friend's shadow. Anne's career in law enforcement only widened the gap. While Anne commanded respect in the community, Clara lived a quieter life, working part-time at a local library and keeping mostly to herself. Still, she remained devoted to her friend, always willing to listen and offer support whenever Anne needed it. When Anne's marriage began to falter, Clara became her sounding board. She listened to and complained about money, about Michael, about the life she thought she deserved, but didn't have. Clara sympathized, even though she sometimes grew tired of Ann's constant dissatisfaction. She told herself that a true friend never turned away, even when the conversations grew heavy. What Clara didn't realize was that her loyalty was slowly binding her to a dangerous secret. Ann's tone shifted over time. Her frustrations became sharper, her bitterness more obvious. She spoke about Michael with contempt rather than love, and though Clara tried to offer reassurance, she began to feel uneasy. Ann's words carried an edge that seemed more than simple anger. Clara dismissed it as stress, convincing herself that her friend was simply venting after difficult days. Despite the doubts, Clara stayed close. She trusted Ann, just as she always had. But her closeness placed her in a fragile position, one she could not escape from once events began spiraling out of control. Without knowing it, Clara was standing at the edge of a storm that would change both of their lives forever. As her marriage continued to fracture, and McManus sought comfort in places she knew were dangerous. That was when David Larkin entered her life. He was everything Michael wasn't: wealthy, charismatic, and willing to give in the attention she felt she had been missing for years. Their connection began innocently, small conversations at community gatherings where David often made donations and rubbed shoulders with local officials. But those conversations quickly grew into something more, fueled by Ann's hunger for excitement and David's thrill in pursuing someone forbidden. What started as stolen glances turned into late-night phone calls, and soon into secret meetings far from prying eyes. David offered her a taste of a life she craved: dinners in expensive restaurants, promises of travel, and an escape from the suffocating walls of her modest home. For Ann, it was intoxicating. Every time she was with him, she imagined what life could be if she cut loose the parts that held her down. But with that fantasy came danger. David was reckless with his charm, the kind of man who enjoyed the rush of secrets but never considered the consequences. And, trained to think like a cop, knew the risks but was too entangled to care. The affair gave her something more powerful than romance. It gave her a vision of a new future, one that didn't involve Michael at all. The deeper she fell, the colder she became toward her husband. Michael's quiet gestures of love seemed meaningless compared to David's lavish promises. Every argument at home only reinforced what she told herself in her mind: Michael was in the way. For Ann, the affair was no longer about desire. It was about escape, and the price of freedom would soon become unthinkably high. And McManus had spent years studying crime, not just through her work as an officer, but through the endless files of reports and investigations she had handled. Now, she turned that same knowledge inward, using it not to protect, but to plan. The thought that had begun as a whisper in the back of her mind grew louder each day. If she wanted a life with David, if she wanted freedom from her marriage and the debts that weighed her down, Michael could no longer be part of her future. She began to think like an investigator, crafting a scenario that would leave no trail back to her, and read over old case files, paying attention to the mistakes criminals made and how they were caught. She analyzed car accidents, looking for patterns, and replayed them in her mind as if solving a puzzle. Soon, she began rehearsing her own version of that puzzle, a death that would look like a tragic accident rather than a crime. Her plan was simple on the surface. Michael would die on a rural road late at night, his car mangled beyond repair. But beneath that simplicity lay careful calculation. She would need to know his schedule, the roads he drove, the timing of his routines. She mapped out the details like a blueprint, memorizing each step until it became second nature. To Ann, it wasn't murder. At least, that's not what she told herself. It was an operation, a mission she was uniquely qualified to carry out. Her badge had taught her how to think strategically, how to manipulate evidence, how to anticipate questions before they were asked. Now, she would use those same skills against the very system she once served. What began as fantasy was turning into grim determination. The night in McManus put her plan into motion was quiet, the kind of night when the streets seemed to hold their breath. Michael had left home late after and suggested he take a drive to clear his head. She stayed behind, composed and watchful, while her mind ticked through the steps she had rehearsed. By the time Michael set out, the trap was already in place, and had chosen a lonely stretch of road, one she knew well from patrols, a place where an accident could happen without witnesses. Michael's car was later found smashed against a tree, its front end twisted like paper. To the untrained eye, it looked like a tragic mishap, a man too tired or distracted to make a turn. But something about the scene didn't fit. There were no skid marks, no sign that he had tried to brake or swerve. It was as if the crash had been choreographed rather than caused by chance. When police arrived, and was already there, her face arranged into the perfect mask of grief. She played her role flawlessly, embracing fellow officers and speaking softly of her husband's supposed exhaustion. To them, she was not just a widow but a colleague, and they extended sympathy without suspicion. The uniform that had earned her respect now shielded her from doubt. Behind her composure, and felt a chilling calm. She had carried out the plan exactly as intended. Michael's death was ruled an accident within hours, the kind of case that would never have raised alarms if not for the small details waiting quietly to be uncovered. For Ann, the mission was complete. She believed her life of freedom was about to begin. What she did not realize was that the cracks in her perfect crime had already begun to show. And McManus carried herself through the days following Michael's death with remarkable composure. She accepted condolences, stood at the funeral with dry eyes, and answered every question with a voice steady enough to convince most people that she was simply coping in her own way. For the community, it was a heartbreaking tragedy. For Clara Hayes, it was unsettling. Clara had expected grief, raw and visible, but what she saw instead was control. Too much control for a woman who had just lost her husband. Clara began noticing small things that gnawed at her, and never spoke about Michael with sadness. She spoke about moving forward, about practical details, about closing chapters. Her words sounded rehearsed, as though she had prepared them in advance. Then came the discovery that changed everything for Clara. While helping and organize some papers, she stumbled across messages on Ann's phone, messages from David Larkin, filled with affection and urgency. It was clear Ann had been living a double life. The revelation left Clara shaken. She replayed every conversation they had shared in recent months, the bitterness in Ann's voice when she mentioned Michael, the strangely cold way she described her marriage. Suddenly, all those moments took on a darker meaning. Clara didn't want to believe what her mind was piecing together, but the picture forming was impossible to ignore. As suspicion grew, so did Clara's sense of dread. She wondered if her loyalty to Ann had blinded her, if by standing too close she had missed signs that were obvious all along. Every instinct told her to step back, yet she felt trapped in the knowledge she now carried. Ann's secret affair was more than betrayal. It was a warning sign that Michael's death was not what it seemed. Clara realized she might be the only person willing to question the story everyone else accepted. Detectives began revisiting the night of Michael McManus's death, unsettled by the unusual details of the crash. At first glance, the accident had seemed straightforward, but certain inconsistencies refused to fade. The absence of skid marks suggested Michael hadn't tried to stop, and the damage to the car seemed inconsistent with the way it had struck the tree. What looked like a tragic accident began to resemble something else, something deliberate. They pulled Michael's phone records, a routine step that quickly raised new questions. On the night of his death, Ann had exchanged several calls with David Larkin, a man who, on paper, should have had no connection to her family. The timing of those calls coincided too neatly with Michael's final drive. Investigators dug deeper and uncovered more. Text messages that revealed intimacy, urgency, and plans for a future together. Suddenly, Ann's carefully constructed image of a grieving widow began to crumble. Surveillance footage offered another clue. A traffic camera on the outskirts of town captured a patrol car traveling the same rural road where Michael's accident occurred, at nearly the exact time of the crash, and had told investigators she was home that evening, grieving alone. Now, the footage suggested otherwise. The badge that had once protected her was turning into the very thing that trapped her. As evidence accumulated, detectives built a timeline that pointed directly at Ann. Her alibi was unraveling, her motives were becoming clear, and her secret life with David was no longer hidden. The woman trusted to uphold the law had left a trail, one she believed she was too clever to leave behind. Each discovery pulled her deeper into the spotlight of suspicion, and what once seemed like a tragic accident was now being examined as a calculated killing. When the investigation reached its peak, Ann McManus could no longer hide behind her uniform or her reputation. Detectives confronted her with the evidence they had gathered, phone records, surveillance footage, and testimony that pointed directly to her. The mask she had worn so carefully began to crack, and tried to explain away the inconsistencies, claiming coincidence and misunderstanding. But her confidence faltered when prosecutors revealed the strength of their case. For the first time, the officer who once interrogated others now found herself on the other side of the questions. The courtroom was filled with shock when the trial began. Residents of the small town who had once admired and as a symbol of justice now sat in disbelief as they listened to the story of betrayal and murder. The prosecution painted a clear picture: a woman trapped in a failing marriage, driven by greed and lust for a new life, who used her training to orchestrate her husband's death. They described how she staged the crash, coordinated with her lover, and thought she could outsmart the very system she once served. The defense tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that grief can look different in every person, and that her friendship with David Larkin had been exaggerated. But the facts were too heavy to ignore. Witnesses testified, including Clara Hayes, whose reluctant words about Ann's behavior after Michael's death painted a chilling picture of a woman who seemed almost proud rather than broken. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. Guilty of first-degree murder, Ann's fall from grace was complete. Once hailed as a protector of the community, she was now branded as its greatest betrayer. The badge that had once given her power now symbolized her downfall, a reminder that no one is above the law. And McManus's sentencing marked the end of a case that shook the town to its core. Life in prison without the possibility of parole became her reality, a punishment that reflected not just the crime itself, but the betrayal of trust that came with it. For the community, the verdict was both a relief and a wound. People who once waved at her patrol car now spoke of her name with disbelief. The officer who had promised to protect them had become the very danger they feared. Clara Hayes carried the heaviest burden outside the prison walls. Testifying against and meant tearing apart a friendship that had defined much of her life. She replayed their memories with fresh eyes, questioning whether and had always been capable of such darkness, or if the years of frustration had transformed her into someone unrecognizable. Though Clara had done the right thing, she struggled with guilt, wondering if she should have seen the warning signs sooner. Her life moved forward, but shadows of the past followed her everywhere. David Larkin, once the spark of Ann's secret dreams, disappeared from public view after the trial. His reputation was destroyed, his business crumbling under the weight of scandal. Though never charged as an accomplice, whispers about his involvement never faded. For him, Ann's downfall meant more than the loss of a lover. It meant the end of the influence and respect he once enjoyed. The case of Ann McManus remains a chilling reminder of how power, greed, and desire can twist even those sworn to uphold justice. Behind the uniform and the badge was a woman who believed she could control every outcome, but in the end, the truth unraveled her. Her story lingers as a warning. The darkest betrayals often come from those we trust the most.